Welcome to Decoding the Creative, a show about the joys and burdens of the artistic journey. This show is an examination of the creative mind, and it can hopefully help you understand yourself and others. If you're a creative person, a writer, musician, actor, streamer, or podcaster, this is for you. If you're connected to a creative person through marriage or family or friendship, and you want to understand them better, this is for you. In this episode, we talk about the very real way that creative ambitions can impact your day job. Creative folks are a neurotic bunch, and this unique way of thinking can impact your career ambitions. But before this, we do a brief introduction so you can understand our journeys as well. So without further ado, this is Episode 1, Quitting Your Day Job. So, Episode 1, I'm here with my co-host Ben Evans. Before we delve into the mind of the artist, let's introduce ourselves with a quick bio. A little bio about myself. I started playing bass in middle school. I quickly got involved in a few local musical endeavors in high school. Before long, my musical experiences really began to define my social experience, who I spent my time with, and how I saw my own identity. Music gave me a sense of self, a sense of purpose, a social network, and an outlet for self-expression. After playing bass in a few local bands, I started singing in a metalcore band. We'll talk more about that at some point, I'm sure. I eventually picked up guitar as a method for songwriting. I started teaching guitar, bass, and voice lessons for several years. I really enjoyed that. I served in other creative roles throughout the community, and I also branched into a few writing endeavors as well, including blogging and poetry. I also started writing fiction after studying English in my graduate program at ECU. I've done some public speaking and some teaching here and there on occasion. So, Ben Evans, drummer extraordinaire, let me hear your bio.
Yeah, man. So my music experience and my just growth over the course of when I was younger to now is not anything to write a book over per se. It's pretty standard. When I was I got a love for music at a very early age. My mom, dad were huge music people. Music was always playing in my house, but I was really honed in onto the percussive elements of music. My dad loved funk and Motown and soul music, really drum and bass heavy music. So I was always drumming on tabletops. I was always outside drumming on the trees. Really grasping onto the percussive elements of music. And what's really neat is when I started playing drums officially, I think around 14, was right around the time you started playing bass.
Oh, yeah.
Which was super neat because me and you, I think, had an advantage that some musicians don't, where we got to learn our craft at the same time. And historically, bass and drums have always been that pairing in music. If you can get a tight bassist and a tight drummer and they're in sync together, that makes the music.
That's
so
it.
I think that was really neat for me and you to get that advantage at an early age to work with one another and really form and learn not just how to play drums and not just how to play bass, but how do you work with a bassist and how does a bassist work with a drummer, which was neat. But as I got older, got into high school, I played, me and you again played in several projects together, hardcore music, what was it, like more dad rock music at one point. We played in all kinds of stuff, man, all kinds of musical endeavors, which was neat. Both me and you toured, did all kinds of shows. We had so much experience with that. I eventually moved out of the state. But everywhere I lived, whether it be DC, I moved to Pennsylvania, which is where I currently reside. But I lived in several different spots of PA. But no matter where I lived, I was always involved in a band. So mainly hardcore bands, which I'm still in one now to this day. I'm residing in the Lancaster, York, Pennsylvania area, which is central PA to those that don't know. So I'm still playing music. So even when I was doing all that through my 20s, I'm still doing that now as a about to be 32-year-old. Over the course of the years, I've gotten to tour, I've gotten to book shows, I've gotten to manage shows, I've done lighting at shows. I've just always tend to immerse myself in the years into the live element, super addicted to that aspect of it. But yeah, that's pretty much what I do now. I just casually play shows when that's able to happen. One of my bands just released a new album, The Road to Milestone, back in November. And, just when I can get my creativity out, that's when I do it, my friend.
Yeah. Lighting, booking, promotion, you've literally done it all in the musical
Man,
world, and it is
I've tried it all.
a jack of all trades.
I've been successful at some and have not been successful at others, but
Yeah.
I think trying has been the fun part of it all.
That's right. Yeah, and I actually, was considering, as I was thinking about our bios, also was thinking about the bio of us as friends and as creative partners, because that's a whole separate thing too. And it is interesting that we kind of grew up together and really started playing instruments at the same time, and then started joining things at the same time. And so all of that, I think we kind of tracked together in that way. And so here we are now, newbies all over again, novices all over again, learning how to podcast instead. And,
Sounding super awkward the first episode.
Oh, probably. Come on. Look, we're just getting our sea legs out from underneath us. And,
there we go. I like it.
We're just learning the ropes. And so exploring a new endeavor, it's weird to be new at something, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you are seasoned as a musician or as a writer, and then you either start a new instrument or you start a new craft, you forget in the process that it is weird to be new, right?
Oh, yeah. I've been thinking about that all this week, leading up to recording this. Is like, I think you can probably attest to this as well. We've both been, not to boast ourselves, but I mean, we'd be foolish to say we're not good at what we do. And, now applying, going into something new like a podcast, it was like, oh man, this is weird being in something that I haven't done before, really, and that I don't know if I'm going to be eventually good at. So yeah, it's exciting though too. So I like it.
Yes. Listen to us as we fumble our way through a brand new craft. Look, I'm ready to do a bass solo, but I am not ready for this.
There we go.
But anyway, today we're talking about how does the creative mind process the idea of quote unquote making it? How does creative passion impact your day job? So that's what we're contemplating today. So I'll start and kind of pose this thing to consider for you.
Okay.
Artists, how do they tend to have a different view of making a living, and how does that manifest it in your own life?
Oh man. So I think too, to preface, all of our conversations with, we're obviously not experts. We don't have any PhD.
Right.
But I think it's really cool that me and you want to share our basic life experiences, our basic life opinions of these different topics. And as time goes on, we're going to be bringing some friends and people that have different perspectives as well. And some of them that actually have, on paper experience, talking about these different things. So, but I think to me, you pointed out something which you're going to go over in your take of this, but the experience and observation, if you would. So I think that really starts, to me, a lot of people I know started when they were super young. And I think that when you're young, you obviously are fascinated by the rush and sense of accomplishment, you get when you hit a milestone, whether it's huge or, just something super small.
Oh, yeah.
And I think when we watch TV or listen to music, especially if you grow up in a musical household, you see how cool musicians look, and you see how much they get into it. And when you start picking up an instrument, guitar, vocals, bass, drums, trumpet, saxophone, whatever it is, when you hit those little milestones, you're combining the two feelings of this is really cool, and also I'm addicted to accomplishing something that I've never accomplished before.
Right.
And when we're children, I think that just really, there's a spark that happens in our brain, and we just really start, chasing that. And that goes into adolescence, I think, for a lot of us, when we actually start grasping, wanting to play an instrument if we haven't started one already at a younger age. I know I didn't, me and you didn't start till we were adolescents, but we probably had that desire to want to play something. In that adolescence, after we started playing and really honing in on our craft, joining a band and getting that taste of what it's like to play a show, what it's like to hang out with our band members, our friends, that carefree fun and have those adventures of, getting in a couple of cars, packing up our gear, going to a show. Now we start evolving into getting addicted to that excitement and really expanding upon that. Oh man, musicians are super duper cool, and this is so fun. And honestly, I think we get in a sense of tunnel vision as an adolescent, which is really easy to do because that's where you're being formed by the world around you. So when you get addicted to that rush of playing a show and playing music and writing a song, it doesn't matter if it sounds good or not. You get that tunnel vision kind of, and you just start looking, oh man, this is what I want to do for a living.
Yeah.
And I think for me, that's definitely what happened. Once I got the sense of accomplishment of playing drums and playing saxophone before that, and then I started creating songs with other people, playing shows, getting that sense of like, this is really fun. The adventure of packing up the van, going out to a show, playing, coming back. That whole experience was just everything to me back then. And then the observation of seeing what it's like for people to receive what you're creating.
Oh, and I do think there is an interesting developmental aspect to that. You go from childhood to adolescence, and when you're in this adolescence, you start to hone a creative craft. That's when many people pick up writing, drawing, painting, whatever the case may be. And there you are in middle school or in high school, and people are making plans about what to do with their future, and you may be romanticizing the idea of stardom or influence or power. And I think part of this speaks to the psychology of the individual, because it's a question of, what do you want? Do you want fame, wealth, influence, power, whatever the case may be? Part of that depends on your personality and your temperament. But I think you get that seed of motivation, and it matures into something else. And I do think our society also kind of reveres the idea of making it. There are so many stories, even reality TV shows like American Idol or The Voice are ultimately celebrating the mythology of making it, right? And so then when you don't make it, when you go from, a senior in high school and then you go into the world and you didn't make it and you are just taking a job somewhere to pay your bills, I think there's a tension that gets created there. There's a tension between your job and your passion where you feel like you failed your passion by not making it also your life, by not making it your way of paying bills. And making it's very elusive. It's hard to make it. But there's a burden of failure there that's maybe a little unfair, something that we should uproot out of ourselves, because it's really not a reasonable expectation at every moment. And I used to feel that way. For me, I used to feel that way. I remember years ago feeling that burden all the time and having to really go through a process to deal with that in myself. And I'll talk more about my personal experience as we go on, because I do think that's an important part of this experience. So
Very true.
Let's talk about the idea of the starving artist, because that's a common trope, right? The starving artist being someone who is starving for the craft. They are struggling, or they are, in poverty or what have you, for the love of the craft. So, is there a point to that? Is it a virtue? Is it bad for you? What are the costs of sacrificing it? What are the benefits? I want to hear what you think about the starving artist idea.
Oh man, well I think the starving artist idea is something that I think we don't notice as creative people, or at least I didn't notice as a creative person until I really started looking back at how often you've heard it from an earlier age. I mean, I was always fascinated, outside of music, but I'm also really into poetry and literature in general. And you would always hear in school about the starving poet and the starving artist, and the tragic lifestyle behind creating these beautiful poems and these beautiful stories. And it was very romanticized. It was very colorful, if you would. Like, it was something you definitely grasped onto, because it was like watching a TV show. You were seeing this lifestyle of someone who was just not making it financially, but that was creating all this struggle and tension, and it was coming out in their words, and they were creating these epic, dramas and epic plays. Like, and I don't know, just when I was younger, that was really attractive to me, and that, latched on to the music part of my life. And I think a starving artist, definitely that term comes from just those moments of, connection with the arts in general, where you feel like you don't need the typical pleasures of the world to make you happy. You don't need finances. All you need is music, poetry, writing. All you need is my photography, blank, whatever it is. And that's all you need to feel alive. And that's a small part, I think, of what makes life, being a creative person, enticing.
Well, So no, I totally agree. I think that it's funny because there's something romantic about the starving artist when you're like 17 or 18, and there's something miserable about it when you're like 35,
Oh,
right?
hell yeah.
start
It's
start
not as fun anymore. Like I
right.
said, it's not fun now. I didn't talk about that now.
Yeah, yeah, it's like starving sucks. You kind of you realize that over time. It's beautiful and romantic and tragic when you're young, and it's just annoying when you're older.
Yeah.
But I do think, and I'll be on a serious note, I do think that creative people and creative culture glorify starving. I don't. I think that that is a problem that we need to uproot in some ways. I think that the psychology goes like this. Some people think that the starving artist, the struggle is good for their craft. Like they take meager jobs, live meager lives in order to remain faithful to their creative self, as if taking a full time job or taking a desk job is a betrayal. It's not faithful to the craft, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in the process, they're missing out on providing for themselves, having good food to eat, having a good bed to sleep on. And those things matter. We know because we've seen people who have lived in vans for years at a time, and we know how
Oh, yeah.
miserable that is because it does matter. At the end of the day, the food you have to eat matters too. But I'll say on the other hand, from personal experience, there might be a nugget of truth in this because maybe they're onto something. I mean, for
Yeah.
me, I took the white collar route years and years and years ago. I started working 8 to 5 desk jobs and got benefits and all of that shit. And I do create now less than I used to. So maybe comfort and financial security diminish our craft, but I would think that starving is the illusion of control. You can spend your
Mm-hmm.
whole life starving in poverty or just in low wage jobs or whatever, and that doesn't make you successful because it's not totally in your control. It just makes you feel like you're in control because you're being faithful to the craft. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that's something that we need to challenge creative culture on because I think it's an insidious element inside of it. But that's kind of where I'm at. I can see
Yeah.
flaws in creative culture and in creative thinking, the romanticizing aspect of the starving artist, while realizing that there's an element of truth in it, but there's an element of self deception too.
Well,
Uh,
and I think when like you mentioned, you start, you take the desk job
yeah,
and you don't create as much, but I think that's what makes when you're younger, at least for me, that's what made me not want to attempt to try and do that, and it makes a lot of because it's hard.
yeah,
So people want to try and focus on if I don't spend all of my time
yeah,
doing this, then I'm not putting 100% into it, which, yes, they're very true in the music industry, especially right now. If you're not putting 110% in, you're not going to make it. And even then, you might not make it. But
yeah,
I think when you get older, you start realizing, like we'll talk about in the future episodes and even some in this episode, you have to learn that balancing act of, yeah, you have to take a job sometime to pay the bills,
yep,
which hopefully, if you make enough money to do so, you can use some of that money to fund back in to your creative passions.
yeah.
But again, the starving artist aspect, that definitely sometimes can cloud that judgment when you're learning the craft and getting older. So
Well, and you mentioned basically like time management, like how much time am I putting
yeah,
into my craft?
yeah.
And I think part of that ties into identity because I think the mindset goes like this. If I'm an adult, if I'm 24, 25, 30 years old, and I am now putting 40 hours a week into being a call center representative, which I used to be, and that's why I make that example. But I'm
Hmm.
putting 5 hours a week into my creativity. What am I? Because when you're younger, your identity is the thing you do. You're a
Hmm.
bassist, you're a singer, you're a writer, and then suddenly adult life hits you, and you're putting most of your time into something that you really don't want your identity to be. You don't want to be XYZ, whatever your day job is. You
Hmm.
consider yourself to be defined by your craft, but your craft is shrinking as your adult responsibilities are growing. So I think that's part of it.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I'll ask this for you, and I'll kind of answer it for myself too. Is
Hmm.
how does creativity impact your perception of your day job over the past several years? How have you felt about that silent tension?
Hmm. Oh man, I think it ties into where the starving artist mentality starts fading a little bit as you get older. And the day job does start, in a lot of people, a lot of creative people, who don't have the privilege of making their creative passion their full-time day job paying the bills. Then it starts, okay, now I have to start identifying with my day job. I do have to start accepting that, but pairing it with the fact that I am a creative person, some people, and I feel like I've learned to do this pretty well, is I've taken creative aspects of what I do as a musician or what I've done creatively over the past, and I have applied them to certain aspects of my day job.
Yeah.
So, music will always be a super important part of me. It'll always be what I like to define myself as. But, reality is I have to have a day job. I have to pay the bills. I have to work in the real world.
Yeah.
But I feel like what's cool is over the course of time, I've incorporated a lot of that into my daily life. I love listening to music while I'm working. Obviously, that's a common thing that a lot of people like to do. But I think especially for people like that are musicians, they listen to music that really stimulates the mood they want to be in while they work. And
Oh,
it helps to
absolutely.
pass the time.
Yeah.
It helps to make the job more fun. And instead of just listening to the top 40 hits, they're actually trying to tailor what they want the rest of their work shift to go like. So,
Yeah.
doing stuff like listening to music to help me stay motivated through work is something I've done. I've used my visual creativity. When I worked retail jobs, being a manager, you have to make everything look pretty, presentable, even in food industry jobs. But I think the visual creativity I learned from making album covers, seeing how that aspect visual art is, how
Yeah.
important that is to the senses. I tailored that to, hey, now I know what's pleasing to the eye when I make a display of guitars when I worked at Guitar Center. Or,
Yeah.
I know how to make a sandwich look really presentable when I'm giving it to a customer at Subway. You
Yeah.
know what I
Yeah.
mean? And even stuff like when I was in managerial roles, and even today, I write a ton of emails, documents for work. And I think my writing, my poetry skills, honing in on that part of my creative craft helped me be more proficient at writing emails, being more, well thought out when I'm making a document. So, I think creative people, hopefully in general, I've tend to notice, take that creativity when they start having to take on the role of their day job is what they got to do. They start taking pieces of that creativity with them. And if
Mm-hmm.
they incorporate it into their day job, it does help them feel more like the musician that's working here and is also successful at doing this while being a musician,
Yeah.
instead of feeling like, oh, I'm having to just give up being a musician or a poet or whatever and just do this job. You
Oh,
know what
I
I
agree.
mean?
And it's interesting, that I think when you're younger, you can compartmentalize where you're like, this is my work time and then this is my
Mm-hmm.
creative time. And at some point, you do have to let them bleed over into one another. Otherwise, one of them ceases to exist, right?
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
I think any way that you can infuse your creative self and the person that you feel like you, quote unquote, truly are into your regular life is great. And I have struggled with that for the longest time. So for me, my untold story of this concept of how my creative experience has impacted my day job kind of goes like this. I remember years and years ago, I was just feeling immiserated at a call center job while
Mm-hmm.
pining to devote my life to a higher purpose. And honestly, it kind of felt like torture. And part of that was that it was a call center because call
Well,
centers are
yeah, I bet.
they're notoriously miserable to work at, and
Oh my
it
God.
is what it is.
Yeah.
But it was totally a heartless experience, a soulless experience, and yet creativity is more of an enriching experience. So there's a huge juxtaposition there.
Mm-hmm.
But part of that was I had to do that job. So I took a lot of time and did a lot of internal processing where I changed my perspectives on things because that burden was really bad for me. It was really detrimental to my mental health.
Mm-hmm.
So my perception kind of changed from this starry-eyed fantasy to pay all my bills with creative interests to something more nuanced and more rational and I think more at peace with my actual life instead of being this compartmentalized fantasy.
Okay.
So I pose that to you. How have your expectations and your ambitions about making it changed over time?
Well, I think over time, like I mentioned earlier, growing into, you know, an adult, if you would say, I guess is the general term to use for it. You got to pay the bills, pay the taxes, if you got a family, I don't have kids. I have dog children, so that's all I have. But, for someone like yourself that has a family, the priorities definitely change.
Yeah.
And you can still be creative. You can still be able to incorporate that in your life. And I guess my ambitions, though, with it have just been I want to accepting the fact of why I can't continue chasing it, I guess, in a full time capacity. It's nothing that I've ever like sold all my gear. I've got my drum set, I've got all that good stuff. But my ambitions and what I am anticipating doing for the rest of my life is, hey, I want to make a living. I want to pay the bills. I want to provide for my girlfriend, my family. But at the same time, I want to continue making those experiences possible. Maybe not on the grand scale of being a, Billboard top 100 artist, but, what can I do to the people around me?
Yeah.
What can I do with the friends that I, have, the band members I'm with? If I can make those connections that made me so in love with music in general when I was growing up, if I can make those connections and instead focus on chasing everything. I want everyone in the world to hear this song and just narrowing it down to the people important to me and anyone else that happens to be able to listen to it, down the line as well through sharing it with your friends
Oh,
and your
absolutely.
family. I think that's where my ambitions lie now is I want to use my creativity. I want to express it when I can. I'm still playing in bands. I'm still playing in shows, even though 2020 made that seem like a fantasy at this point.
Yeah.
But when that happens, I'll continue playing shows. I'll still keep writing songs. I'll still keep releasing music. And I hope that, it connects with the people that it's supposed to connect with. It doesn't matter if it connects with the entire world anymore.
Yeah.
I don't need to make a ton of money off of it anymore. But I just, as a creative person, need to release it out into the world and get it, out of me. And whoever it touches, if it touches one person, if one person connects with it, that's cool with me. And that's kind of where my life is.
Yeah.
With it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I used to frame it like this in my own mind, like maybe you can't change the world, but you can change your world.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So
very true.
Now, when we're younger, we tend to think on global terms. We're like, the biggest artists are the artists known worldwide, right? But we're not really thinking worldwide. We're really thinking in terms of our local impact. And so for me, that's kind of part of how my expectations and ambitions have changed. I've kind of come to the point where I want to create for the sake of creating. I hope people care. I hope people engage. And if it helps provide for my family, that's great. But the most important thing to me now is engagement and influence. I want to change minds. I want to enliven the people's lives, regardless of financial kickbacks. I want to put a message out into the world that resonates with people so that it can make their life better in the process and we can connect with that common human experience. And that's what I've changed is I don't want to change the world. I want to change my world.
There you go. And I think that's a good, not to interrupt, but I think that's a good point to make because I think, again, not to bring back the example, but when you start out being creative, you're just looking at, the famous people and their lives, at how they made you get into, how they inspired you to get into whatever you're creative in. And then as time goes on, and a lot of us don't end up making it to that grand scale, now they start going into what you're talking about, they start really, realizing that this is what I have to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I guess that comes to the point where we are not just looking at ourselves, but we're also looking at society. Ultimately the creative experience, especially if it starts to bloom when you're a child or an adolescent or a young adult, you have so many of these interesting elements. You have the tension between your day job and your creative ambitions. You have the romance of the starving artist, and you have your own ambitions and your desires and your motivations. Often we don't even understand our own motivations, much less control them. So the question becomes, what is the right way to do this, right? If you were to go in a time machine and advise the teenage you, what's a better path, a better way for creative people to approach their craft and their ability to make a living?
Yeah. And I think with everything we've shared today, it's important to realize that this is stuff that we're kind of coming to terms with of how we feel now as like
Right.
30 something year olds.
Yep.
So, what we're talking about is what we feel now. And of course, leading up to these points, we wish we would have known some of the information that we knew now. Because I think if I could go back in time and share some of my experiences with my teenage self, I would really tell him, you know, don't be afraid, to change the way you look at your creativity, I guess, and
Right.
how and what it means for it to be important in your life.
Hmm.
Because I feel a lot of times I had the crisis of man, I think this is it. I don't think I can be the touring drummer or the touring musician that I wanted to be. I don't think it's possible. And I think a lot of creative people get in that funk, and some people handle it better than others. Everyone approaches it differently.
Yeah.
But that's just sadly the nature of what a lot of creative people have to go through, because society does not place a lot of creative jobs on a high priority list,
Yeah.
and you sadly have to be in the right place at the right time to make it big and to take off in terms of any sort of money making career. And it doesn't work for everybody,
Right.
obviously.
Right.
Me and you have seen several creative people who are just immensely talented, and what do? They kind of work regular 9 to 5 jobs just like me and you do. So I would just tell my younger self, hey, don't be afraid of accepting that life might change for you,
Yeah.
and that your creative passion inside of you, you can you can change up the definition a little bit, and you can change up what the end goal is for you and how it's fueled. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So
And then the younger you would talk so much shit because you cut your hair. Because
exactly, he
mind
would.
you, your hair used to be really long, and the younger you would have just ragged you
Oh
relentlessly
my
for.
God, yeah, man. I would have said, man, you look so stupid. Why do you look the way you look? And why do you have gray hair? And you're only 30, 32. Why do you already
Listen,
have gray
the
hair?
gray hair is cool. I'll say this much, I contemplate what's a better way, what's a better path.
Hmm.
And part of that is because I'm a parent and I think about my kids and what if one day they fall in love with writing or drawing or singing or whatever.
You have this actual, like, the
This is
question you asked me, you actually are able to do this. So
yeah, yeah.
that's what's cool with
Yeah, a
your
little
children, which is neat.
yeah, yeah, you're right. Parenting is like a weird form of time travel in a way.
Hmm.
But for me, how I see this is there's a big problem in the discussion because it's a societal problem. The arts in general are kind of a brutal winner take all blood sport. We're all vying for the same listeners, for the same patrons. And this is made worse by like the globalized nature of the arts. We hear all this dialogue about like shopping local and eating local,
Hmm.
but what about listening local or reading local? Right now, every musician on earth is in a competition with the top artist on the music app, Spotify, Apple Music, for the same listeners. We are all contending with the same listeners as your top 40 artists. And every writer, if you're writing novels, is contending with Stephen King, right?
Hmm.
Because there's not a
Yeah.
big read local movement. So we have to build a new system, I think, of sustainable creativity where it's not a zero sum game where you're hoping to win this lottery and go viral or become famous, where we have a way that you can integrate creating into your life. Where if you have a 40-hour-a-week job and you also like writing books, or if you have a full-time job and you also play in a band and you're dropping a new album this week, that's okay.
Yeah.
That's not failure. So we have to really rewrite our understanding of it, and we really need to challenge like cultural and societal expectations because there is something kind of damaging in what we expect. And I
Hmm.
saw that a lot when I used to teach music lessons. I saw that in some of my students that they had aspirations, but on the flip side of that aspiration, there was also a desire to make it that was unlikely and would likely break their heart one
Hmm.
day. And
Oh,
that
yeah.
that shouldn't be the case. We have to build a sustainable method where we understand that it's okay if it's not your full-time job, right?
Hmm. Yeah, and I think I would love for society to turn in that direction to where, your children, if they want to do something creative, don't have to go through what me and you went through and what a lot of us creative people go through, the crisis, if you will, of is this what my life is coming to? I have to give up being a creative person
Yeah.
and have to just become a, fill in the blank.
Yeah.
Which isn't a bad, but that's the thing. We have to realize, I think in the sum of this episode, we don't, quitting our day job is not what we have to do in order to make it as a creative person.
Right.
So, and I think that's, we'll talk more about how we think society could appreciate the arts and definitely make it more lucrative for people
Yeah.
while also being able to do a 9-to-5 job or whatever the case may be. But yeah, I think that's what we have both kind of talked about in general in different aspects is overall, you don't have to quit your day job after you go through the whole crisis of it all, which we wish we didn't have to go through, but you can integrate the two
Yeah.
and still be a creative person and still hopefully pay your bills to an extent.
Well, and obviously we're going to solve the world's problems here on this podcast. We're working on it right now.
Mm-hmm.
We got a big plan. So that's the beginning. There's a lot of conversation to be had. So
yes.
Overall, the message is simple to everybody listening. Love yourself, accept yourself, find a way to integrate your creative craft into your life without letting it consume you and destroy you in the process. Be a whole person and find peace and equanimity in your creativity. I think that's the moral of the story here.
That very much agreed there, my friend. Very much agreed.
So that's our show. Feel free to reach out to us with comments, questions, complaints, or future show ideas at our email decodingthecreative@gmail.com. Our logo design was made by Dana Gray Studio. Our intro music was recorded by yours truly. You can check out Ben's bands on Spotify. His band, The Road to Milestone, recently released an album entitled Everything Ends, and his band Avery has an album entitled Death of Us. Check them out, and we'll see you soon.